Hi, and welcome back to the Bug Fight Design Diary. This would be episode 3. I'm a little late getting this episode out this week because I went on a trip to see a friend in Mexico City and I got COVID. I still have COVID actually, but I'm on the mend now, so here we go. I'm going to start off like I did last time by answering some questions from the comments, and in fact, one of those questions is going to be a launch pad into the rest of this episode, because it's a big question and I think it's worth answering before I get too much farther into the project. Here we go. A&B asks, how will this be sold and distributed, i.e. brick and mortar game store, online hobbyist website, Kickstarter, reward, etc.? So there are a few paths to get a game out into the world. The two main paths are to go through a publisher or to try to self-publish through Kickstarter, which is actually a pretty popular option for board games and card games nowadays. I really want to go through Kickstarter because I really want to be in control of the art. And my impression is that if you go with the publisher, they're going to really dictate what art you use. I don't know, I guess I'm stubborn, and if I want the game to look a certain way, I'd rather just do the Kickstarter work and self-publish. If this is just the worst idea ever, and maybe somebody in the comments has had experience with trying to kickstart something because they wanted art to look a certain way, let me know. A&B Bakery asks, at what point would you consider the game ready for Kickstarter? How much time do you want to allot yourself to get to that point? I really don't know. I have no idea how long this design diary is going to go until I hit launch on Kickstarter. My rough estimate was something like 6 more months. It's July now, and maybe by the end of this year it would be ready. Obviously, that means a lot of things. The design needs to get exactly where I want it to be. I need to have the art ready to go. I need to have marketed the game a lot more. I need to have some idea of shipping estimates and manufacturing costs and all that kind of stuff. Maybe that could happen in 6 months. Maybe it's going to take another year. I have no idea. Okay, Elijah C says, hi, Elijah. Elijah C asks, some simple rules questions. He asks, if 2 players capture an area simultaneously, what happens? If they have equal power that's greater than the capture requirement, what happens? That's a great question. So in this case, what happens is that both players just keep playing. The area only gets captured at that point once one of the players has more power than the other. I think this creates actually a pretty good source of tension. For example, the area card that ends the game, the flag, it's worth a lot of victory points. Its capture target is 20. It's really high. But on more than one occasion in a playtest and when I've been playing personally, we've seen that both players are fighting for the flag and end up breaking that capture target around 22 or 23, but then again they're tied. And this creates this great kind of overtime tension that I really like, where both players are kind of putting all of their efforts into the flag at that point to try to get as much power on that area as possible. I think it works decently. Elijah also asks, are there locations for lanes that affect what's happening on the board? Are they all post-game effects? I guess he's asking, do the area cards only do things once the game is over? No, there are certain area cards that come in sets that, for example, if you get one part of the set and then suddenly get the other part of the set, immediately upon capturing that second part of the set, you gain 5 power at a different area. So there's different effects like that I think kind of mix it up. Sir Guy 6678 says, interesting video. Have you read Jamie Stegmaier's book on crowdfunding? I've not read Jamie Stegmaier's book, but my gosh, I've watched a lot of his videos. I've read his blog a lot. I've been reading Jamie Stegmaier's stuff on Kickstarter for, maybe 6 years, ever since I kind of had the twinkle in my eye to do a Kickstarter one day. Sir Guy also asked, how is my playtesting going? That's a good question. I feel like it's going well. I'm also deeply suspicious that it's going well because I'm only playing with people I know pretty well. I'd like to think that I have friends that would give critical, harsh, brutal feedback if I needed it, but I'm anxious to get the game into the hands of playtesters that don't know me, that have to kind of read the rules cold and then just play after that and give feedback. Hopefully I'll be breaking into that territory in the next month or so, and maybe even we'll do an episode entirely dedicated to just what playtesting looks like, and maybe even have some faces on the video that aren't just me. Chariot Rider, hi Chariot, he asks, do you have some sort of metric in place to know when you should pivot away from addressing the ant-hole problems, he's referencing the end of my previous episode, and start focusing on refining the existing cards? How do you know when it's time to work on fleshing out the potentially flawed or limited system you currently have, rather than building a stronger foundation? Chariot, no. I guess the conclusion I came to last time is yeah, I'm just going to keep going for now. If you have any further insight, please let me know. I Am Unicron says, does the energy system add fun mechanics and decisions for the playtesters? It looks like it might be able to, but the example cards I saw just seemed to show the mechanic turning your bug designs into blank cards with numbers early on, and only maybe later getting to use the interesting effects attached. Yeah, that's a good point. I think the thing that saves the early game is that I ended up putting those energy types on areas as well. So for example, you'll see a tree trunk area that you're trying to capture, and it has the dirt energy printed on it, which means that your dirt bugs will get their abilities activated at that area. That saved a lot of that. But maybe that's not enough. In fact, one of the big shifts I'm looking at in the design right now is taking the energy types from 4 to 3. So right now there's leaf, water, flower, and dirt. And I think I'm gonna cut water so that those energy types don't restrict the abilities as much as they are right now, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think the energy types are a good kind of restriction that makes for strategic kind of puzzle solving plays, but maybe that's not enough. So again, I'm working on that. Blobbertson asks, hi Blake, when are you dropping the Cambrian Explosion expansion? LOL. But he goes on to ask, I'm curious about what you think makes a game fun and how those thoughts intersect with your framing of games as a mesh of overlapping narratives. Blake is referring to the 2 video essays I released before doing this design diary. Go watch Story Machines Volume 1 and 2 on my channel if you've not seen them yet. So I'll answer his first question, what do I think makes the game fun? There's a few things, but one of the things I didn't get to mention in the previous video is deck building. I know that username Video Games Are Bad, aka Harry, mentioned this also in another comment, but the game has a real opportunity to create this kind of deck building, synergy building, engine building fun, and I think it's already doing that. Hopefully I'll get to show some of that in a later episode, but right now you have certain bugs that you start off with. Yes, they don't necessarily synergize all that well, but as you recruit new bugs into your deck and as you play them and they go into your discard and get shuffled back into your deck, you'll start to notice as you play, oh, there's some synergies between these bugs. For example, a bug that adds more power to an area for more cards that you have in your hand synergizes well with other bugs that allow you to draw more cards into your hand. I'm a sucker for that kind of synergistic deck building stuff, and it's here. It's not working as well as it could be right now, but it's already there to some degree, and I think that's a lot of fun. Blobbertson's other question, how do these thoughts intersect with my framing of games as a mesh of overlapping narratives? At the risk of derailing this entire episode in the pedantic waters of talking about how deck building is itself a sort of narrative system, I do think that looking at 2 different cards and finding out how they interact has a sort of plot line, has a plot arc to it, in the same way that I outlined in some of my previous more academic work. Username Jade Faye asked, so like, what's your target audience? Because yeah, you could fine tune this and try to become MTG but simple or something else. MTG here stands for Magic the Gathering, a sort of notoriously complex 2-player card dueling game. I'm going to use this question to spring into the rest of the episode here by talking about who I think my target audience is. And I think this is a question I really need to have nailed down early on because, like Jade's saying, I can go either way with this. I can grow more complex, I can add more rules, and in fact kind of create a deeper game, possibly. Or I can continue to design in a more limited space. I do want the game to not take very long. I don't want the game to take a long time to teach either. I also don't want to restrict the game to, say, 14 and older. I would like this game to be playable by maybe 10 or 11-year-olds. If anybody has a 10 or 11-year-old or is 10 or 11 watching this video and I'm way off with what I think a 10 or 11-year-old can handle, please let me know. I have an 8-year-old and I'm trying to estimate from there. But I'll say, just right here at the top, I'm not trying to design a complex, deep board game. I'm trying to make a card game that you can pull out and play in 30 minutes with really rich, rewarding decisions and strategic choices, but also a game that doesn't wear out its welcome and a game that doesn't have a ton of downtime between turns where you're paralyzed with analyzing your cards or paralyzed with analyzing the game state. Say who's controlling different lanes or something like that. No, I want this game to feel breezy while also feeling like it really rewards your time. I don't want this to be a complex game. I want this to be what most would consider a lightweight game. I want it to play in about 30 minutes, maybe 45. I don't want the rules overhead to take longer than 5 or 10 minutes. But I don't want to sacrifice interesting choices and strategic moves in the course of its playtime. So that determines a kind of audience, I think. A lot of times you hear the word like gateway game thrown around in board games, stuff like Ticket to Ride or Settlers of Catan. Games that are a little crunchier or a little bit more complicated than something like Sorry or Monopoly, but could maybe lure someone into the heavy stuff. I think that's what I want Bug Fight to be. For Bug Fight to exist in that space, I need to be very careful about what mechanics I add to the game or what rules exceptions I have. I don't know, I've had maybe roughly 12 to 15 different people play the game. I can say confidently from the people that have played the game, I think it's sitting in that exact spot right now. I've had hardcore gamers play the game and they seem to enjoy it. I've had people that don't play many games and they seem to grasp it pretty quickly and can still play. So I think I'm in a spot right now that does cater to both camps. I think recently the question has become, by not catering to either of those camps, do I miss both? Do I actually miss the opportunity to have a really strong, passionate audience about the game? For example, Jade mentioned Magic the Gathering. That has a very fervent following because there's really no cap on complexity. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's certainly a cap on how complex Magic the Gathering can be. But to some degree, that play space, the amount of cards in rotation at any given time, is pretty big. And a lot of the players that play Magic the Gathering regularly, and especially the players that play Magic the Gathering in a competitive environment, really enjoy that complexity. And so the designers can really tailor the design to that audience. When I was in grad school, getting my very lucrative degree in fiction writing, I had a professor admonish me to budget my complexity. It's actually something I've also heard from Richard Garfield, the designer of Magic the Gathering. The way the professor explained it then is that readers, and I think by extension game players, can only sort of comprehend so much at once. One of the easiest examples that brings to mind are Christopher Nolan's films. I remember Tenet in particular is a movie that I walked out of thinking, this movie is probably pretty enjoyable if it were actually made for human brains to comprehend in the span of watching it. If you have a lot of love for Chris Nolan's Tenet, I'm sorry, I hate to alienate that part of my audience. The audience that I've tried to keep in mind and target, to use Jade's word here, is not savvy with board games. It's an audience that knows about card games and knows about board games out there and maybe is even interested in dipping their feet into some more complex territory. But I want Bug Fight to meet them right where they're at and to give them a pretty deep, interesting decision space despite not asking a lot from them. As someone who's played a lot of Gloomhaven and Mage Knight and Twilight Imperium 3rd and 4th edition, I know what it means to enjoy a big, healthy, nutritious, complex board game. But I think the kind of games that I keep coming back to are actually much lighter, and games that can condense a pretty fun, pretty intensely narrative experience into the length of an episode of television. This is where that term complexity budget comes into play, because that word budget implies that if I take something away, I leave room to add something else. Or if I'm going to add a mechanic, I have to think really critically about what that's going to mean for rules overhead, for how long the game is going to take, and for if anyone's going to have to look at a reference card or look up a rules exception for a certain card. In designing every single synergy and designing every single area card and bug ability, the thing on the top of my mind is this going to create a rules exception? Is this going to create the need for a turn phase card where players have to look off to their side and say, okay, are we in the planning phase, in the prep phase, or in the cleanup phase? If you've played many board games, you know that that sort of thing is kind of par for the course at this point. I'd rather avoid all of that. I think that starts to predetermine and self-select the audience that I'm actually going for, which is to say, an audience that's really wide, but maybe not super targeted. I don't know that I'm actually going for a very specific type of gamer, right? A sort of war gamer, say, or a Euro gamer, or I'm not trying to find people that are into, say, middleweight economic games. I wish I could specify that, because then maybe the marketing and some of the other parts of the process would be easier. But I think one of the things that comes with the challenge of trying to make a game kind of for as many people as possible is a challenge that I really like taking on. It's actually a challenge underneath this channel. As I've tried to translate some of the academic stuff of board games, some of the academic stuff of game studies into really widely digestible concepts. Now, I say all that with a lot of fear and trembling. I say all that not knowing if it's actually happening, not knowing if the game right now does hit a wide audience. I'm hoping it does. And I was actually surprised in the last episode to see how many people had game design recommendations. It was interesting to sift through all those, and maybe I'll steal some of those ideas. But what's interesting is that I certainly couldn't add all of them. If I took all those recommendations and threw them into the game, and of course no one was actually suggesting that I do this, the game would be 9 hours long, it would be a big baggy mess, and no one would enjoy it. So there are a lot of good ideas for the game, but given what I'm trying to go for, given the target audience that I'm after, a good idea really isn't good enough. It has to be the right idea for what I'm designing. Yeah, thanks so much, and I'll see you next week.